Ukraine has just done something that no one in Washington, Moscow, or Beijing thought was possible. In less than 4 years, a country that was written off as a Soviet arms bazaar has transformed itself into the most advanced drone power on the planet. And the scale of it is genuinely staggering. Ukraine is now producing drones by the millions hunting Russian soldiers at a rate that has pushed the Kremlin into its worst casualty month of the entire war. On April 13, 2026, President Volodymyr Zelensky stood before the cameras on Ukraine's Day of the Gunsmith and confirmed what Russian generals had been denying for months. Ukraine is manufacturing millions of first-person view drones, or FPVs, every single year. And the Russian army, the second largest military on Earth, has no answer for it. What you're about to learn is how a country with garages full of volunteers built a war machine that is now grinding the Russian invasion into the mud one drone at a time. And the numbers that we're going to walk you through today have never been assembled in one place before. This is the story of how cheap plastic quadcopters are quietly dismantling the largest land army in Europe, and why the Kremlin has no idea how to stop it. Now let's start with what actually happened, because the story of Ukraine's drone revolution is the story of the entire war. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion in February of 2022, Ukraine's defense industry was by any honest measurement a relic of a bygone era. Back in 2016, Ukraine ranked 10th in the world for arms exports with total revenues of around $528 million, and the overwhelming majority of that was Soviet-era leftovers being sold off to whoever would buy them. Ukraine was not a military-industrial powerhouse. It was a country selling the furniture to pay the rent. But by February of 2026, according to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, that picture had been completely flipped on its head. Defense production capacity had increased 50 times over since the war began. 50 times. And 82% of all weapons being procured by the Ukrainian armed forces were now domestically manufactured, a massive leap from just 46% the year before. This kind of industrial transformation from near zero to self-sufficiency has no real precedent in modern warfare outside of the Second World War mobilizations in Britain and the United States. And Ukraine did it while being bombed on a nightly basis. The Kyiv School of Economics, in its April 2026 report, put the total value of Ukraine's defense technology sector at $6.8 billion, which is 6 times what it was in 2021. Ukrainska Pravda, citing that same report, confirmed that unmanned aerial vehicle production had grown by 137% year over year, and ground robot production had exploded by 488%. These are not incremental improvements. These are the numbers of a country that has reorganized its entire industrial base around a single idea, which is that drones are the future of war, and Ukraine intends to own that future. And this is where the hard numbers become impossible to ignore. According to the Kyiv Independent, Ukraine produced 4.5 million drones in 2025 alone. To put that in perspective, the United States, the richest country on Earth with a defense budget north of $900 billion, was projected to produce only about 100,000 comparable drones over a similar time frame. Euromaidan Press called this out, directly stating that Ukraine's 2026 production target of 7 million drones would be roughly 70 times what America plans to make. 70 times. And even that 7 million figure announced by Deputy Defense Minister Serhiy Boyev to NATO counterparts in Brussels may be conservative. Former Defense Minister Rustem Umerov stated in June of 2025 that Ukraine's actual production capacity had already reached 10 million drones per year. The bottleneck Umerov made clear was never the factories. It was the money to buy what the factories could already produce. Every dollar of Western financing now translates almost directly into Russian armor destroyed, Russian soldiers killed, and Russian positions overrun. And this is where things start to shift, because Ukraine wasn't just building more drones, they were building smarter ones. So how did a country that was exporting rusted Soviet tanks in 2016 become the world's leading drone producer by 2026? The answer is a combination of desperation, innovation, and a government policy that Western defense ministries are now scrambling to copy. In April of 2023, Ukraine launched a program called Brave One, a state-backed financing mechanism that funneled money directly to domestic drone manufacturers, many of whom were literally working out of garages and basements at the time. Brave One didn't go through endless procurement cycles. It didn't demand bureaucratic approvals that took years to clear. It gave money to engineers who could prove their drones worked in combat, and it did it fast. That same year, Ukraine produced 300,000 drones, a figure that the United States was projecting to match only over a 2-year span. And things didn't stop there. The production numbers doubled, then tripled, then went vertical. Private companies sprang up by the hundreds. Volunteer networks organized logistics. University engineering departments partnered with frontline units to iterate on designs in real time. An FPV drone that performed well on Monday might have a new electronic warfare-resistant variant by Friday, built in response to what Russian jamming teams had tried over the weekend. Let's get into the breakdown of exactly how this drone empire is being used to dismantle the Russian army, because the details here are devastating. We're going to walk through 4 distinct layers of Ukraine's drone warfare system, and each one represents a piece of technology that Russia simply cannot match. Each one on its own would be a strategic problem for the Kremlin. Combined, they are an industrial-scale nightmare. The first layer is the FPV drone itself, the cheap, deadly workhorse that has become the defining weapon of this war. These drones typically cost between $400 and $600 to produce, which means for the price of a single Russian T-90 tank, at around $4.5 million, Ukraine can manufacture roughly 9,000 FPVs, 9,000. Think about that exchange rate for a moment. Russia builds 1 tank. Ukraine builds 9,000 weapons capable of destroying that tank. And according to Al Jazeera's reporting on April 10th, those FPVs were responsible for 96% of the 35,351 Russian casualties suffered in March of 2026 alone. That single month represents the highest monthly casualty figure of the entire war, a 29% jump from February, and almost all of it came from drones costing less than a used refrigerator. The cost math is catastrophic for Moscow. Russia is losing an average of 316 soldiers killed or wounded for every square kilometer of territory they managed to seize. 1 year ago, that number was 120. The cost of Russian advance has nearly tripled, and Ukrainian drones are the reason why. The second layer is the Interceptor drone, a category that has quietly become one of the most important innovations of the war. Russia's strategic bombing campaign relies heavily on Iranian-designed Shahed drones, which the Kremlin has rebranded as the Garan 2 and is now producing domestically. The Institute for Science and International Security reported that Russia launched 6,462 Shahed-type drones against Ukraine in March of 2026, a new monthly record. And the Council on Foreign Relations noted that Moscow's target for 2026 is to build up to 1,000 Garan 2 drones per day. That sounds overwhelming until you understand what Ukraine has built to counter it. Ukrainian interceptor drones, many of them costing a tiny fraction of the surface-to-air missiles traditionally used to shoot down incoming threats, are now routinely downing Shaheds before they reach their targets. A Patriot missile, for reference, costs around $4 million per shot. An Interceptor drone might cost $2,000 or less. The math is brutal for Moscow. Russia spends tens of thousands of dollars to build and launch each Shahed. Ukraine spends a few $100s to kill it. That kind of cost asymmetry cannot be sustained by any economy, and Russia's, as we'll see in a moment, is already buckling under it. But before we get to that, this is a quick reminder that you're watching Obliterating. We bring you the full picture, not just the headlines. So hit subscribe to ensure you stay ahead of the curve. The third layer is the long-range strike drone, and this is where Ukraine has moved from defensive brilliance into genuine offensive reach. The Flamingo Cruise missile drone hybrid, the Neptune and the newer Ruta system, have given Ukraine the ability to strike deep inside Russian territory, hitting oil refineries, ammunition depots, and strategic airfields hundreds of kilometers behind the front line. These are not toys. The Flamingo in particular blurs the line between drone and cruise missile, carrying a substantial warhead over ranges that until recently only a handful of NATO nations could manage. Euromaidan Press, in its April 11th assessment, concluded that Ukraine had tipped the drone war decisively in its favor, and long-range drones are the central reason. Russian air defense networks, already stretched thin by the demands of protecting the front line, are now being forced to choose between defending their own territory and protecting their advancing troops. They cannot do both. And every oil refinery burned, every fuel depot destroyed, means less gasoline for Russian tanks, less diesel for Russian logistics, and less ability to sustain the grand spring offensive that Moscow keeps promising will deliver a breakthrough. The Russian war economy is being hollowed out from within one precision strike at a time. The fourth layer, and this is the one that should genuinely terrify Russian commanders, is the artificial intelligence layer. Ukraine has deployed a new generation of AI-enabled drones, including the Martian system, which is specifically designed to operate through Russian electronic warfare jamming. Traditional FPV drones rely on a constant radio link between the operator and the drone. Jam the link, and the drone crashes. But the Martian and similar AI-guided platforms can lock onto a target, lose communications entirely, and still complete the strike autonomously. The implications here are enormous because Russian electronic warfare was supposed to be one of the Kremlin's great competitive advantages. It was the one area where Russian engineers could claim parity with the West. And now it is being defeated by Ukrainian software engineers working on laptops. Beyond individual drones, Ukraine has fielded the Swarmer system, a company so advanced in swarm coordination that it has been listed on the NASDAQ. Let that sink in. A Ukrainian wartime drone startup is now publicly traded on one of the largest stock exchanges in the world. Swarmer allows a single operator to command multiple drones, simultaneously coordinating attacks against Russian positions in ways that were strictly science fiction 5 years ago. A single Ukrainian soldier with a tablet can now direct a swarm that would have required a full company of operators just 2 years ago. And what comes next could change everything. On the ground, this drone empire has created something the Russian military has never faced in its modern history. A kill zone stretching roughly 20 kilometers deep along the entire front line, where almost nothing Russian can move without being detected and destroyed. Ukrainian drone operators working in concert with anti-tank ditches, dragon's teeth obstacles, and dense barbed wire fields have turned the approach to every major Ukrainian position into a slaughterhouse. Russian tanks burn before they reach the tree line. Russian infantry squads are picked off one by one as they crawl through shattered fields. And Russian supply trucks are hunted down the moment they leave their staging areas. This is not warfare as it was practiced in the 20th century. This is something new, and Ukraine invented it under fire. Russian doctrine built around massed armor and combined arms assaults has no functional response to a battlefield where every movement is observed and every observed target is attacked within minutes. The Kremlin's generals trained for tank wars on the North German plain. They are instead fighting a drone war in the Donetsk fields, and they are losing it badly. Now let's talk about what this actually means for the strategic balance of power, because the implications go far beyond the current war. Ukraine has received approximately 316.7 billion euros, or about $373 billion in combined aid from the United States and European partners over the past 4 years, according to the Kiel Institute. That is a massive number. But the return on that investment measured in Russian combat power destroyed is arguably the most cost-effective strategic outcome in modern military history. For less than what the United States spent on a single year of the war in Afghanistan, the West has helped Ukraine build a drone industry that is actively dismantling the military of its largest geopolitical adversary. The Pentagon is watching. The Ministry of Defense in London is watching. Berlin, Warsaw, Seoul, and Tokyo are all taking notes, and the Russian response has been one of pure desperation. Moscow is trying to flood Ukraine with cheap Shahed drones, hoping to overwhelm interceptor networks through sheer volume. Ukrainian intelligence assessments reported by the Kyiv Independent indicate Russia aimed to build 79,000 Shahed-type drones in 2025, and the CFR analysis suggests they are pushing toward 1,000 per day by the end of 2026. But volume is not a substitute for quality, and Russia's drones are losing to Ukraine's in almost every category that matters. The Shaheds are slow, they are easy to detect, and they rely on Iranian designs that have not meaningfully evolved since 2022. Ukrainian drones, by contrast, are iterating every few weeks. New airframes, new software, new tactics. Russian soldiers captured on the front line have reported in interviews that they no longer trust any open ground, any tree line, or any building during daylight hours because the drones are always watching. The psychological effect on the Russian infantry is already visible in surrendered units and in the growing number of desertions documented by Ukrainian intelligence. A soldier who believes he will die the moment he moves does not make an effective attacker. And Russia is fielding hundreds of thousands of such soldiers right now. The humiliation for Moscow here cannot be overstated. Russia spent decades presenting itself as a peer competitor to the United States, a nuclear-armed superpower with a formidable conventional military. And in 2026, that military is being systematically dismantled by a country one-third its size using weapons that hobbyists were flying at weekend competitions a decade ago. The Kremlin's propaganda machine is working overtime to hide these casualty figures from the Russian public. But the mothers in Rostov, in Dagestan, in Chechnya, are starting to ask uncomfortable questions. And the recruitment numbers already falling well short of Putin's targets by an estimated 65,000 soldiers are getting worse every month. Now that's not even the worst part for Moscow. The worst part is that Ukraine is still scaling up. The trajectory here is what should keep Russian planners awake at night. In 2022, Ukraine was building drones in basements. In 2025, they produced 4.5 million. In 2026, they are targeting 7 million, with an actual capacity of 10 million if the funding is there. And the Western commitment to financing that capacity is only growing. The United Kingdom alone has pledged more than 120,000 long-range drones to Ukraine in 2026, and European Union discussions about joint drone procurement with Ukrainian manufacturers are accelerating. By the end of 2026, Ukraine may well be not just the dominant drone power in the current war, but the dominant drone exporter in Europe, a geopolitical shift that would have been unimaginable 4 years ago. And this is where the broader strategic picture becomes almost surreal. For decades, the United States and its allies paid enormous sums to maintain a qualitative military edge over Russia, measured in stealth fighters, nuclear submarines, and precision-guided munitions. In 2026, that edge has been extended, amplified, and arguably surpassed by a country that 4 years ago could not manufacture its own rifles. The defense industrial lessons coming out of Ukraine are being studied in every serious defense ministry on the planet, and the verdict is clear. The future of warfare belongs to whoever can iterate fastest, produce cheapest, and deploy at the largest scale. Ukraine is doing all three simultaneously while under active bombardment. What happens next is going to be painful for Moscow, and it is going to be very public. Because the drone revolution is not slowing down, it is accelerating. Every month brings new systems, new tactics, and new casualty records for Russian soldiers pushed forward into kill zones they cannot survive. The Grand Spring offensive that Putin promised would break the Ukrainian defense has instead broken the Russian army, and the primary tool of that destruction was a fleet of plastic quadcopters built by volunteers and engineers in converted warehouses across Ukraine. Russia is now facing a choice it has avoided for 4 years. Keep pouring men into the meat grinder and watch the casualty numbers climb toward levels that threaten political stability at home, or admit that the war cannot be won and face the consequences of that admission. Neither option ends well for the Kremlin, and neither option gets easier with time. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to Obliterate to see more of our coverage of Ukraine's drone revolution and the collapse of Russia's war machine. And thank you as always for watching.